You want to be on the most accurate board for your ability to be able to be applied on a wave canvas as possible, so that you're riding the wave, not the board. And that's a real big point. Like, that's actually hilarious that we're here to surf waves, not boards. That's the way I try and think about it, the way I approach a lot of these boards, and the way I've challenged myself in my surfing.
All right, welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. Super stoked today because we have one of the most innovative surfboard shapers out there on the planet. His asym board with Matt Biolos was chosen by Mick Fanning as his favorite board, won the Electric Acid Surfboard Test contest that year. And this year, he also did Dave Brosovich was like, this is the trippiest board of all the boards, of a very diverse quiver of boards as well in this year's Electric Acid Surfboard Test. We're going to talk about that. The test is still going on, so we can't reveal too much, but it's going to be an interesting discussion there. He also probably shaped one of the shortest boards Dane Gudauskas has ever ridden, and he has his own podcast, which is epic, Swell With My Soul. I still remember listening to one of the episodes from that when Dane was unpacking from his trip to Cloudbreak. That was probably like 8 years ago. And it's probably one of the best surf stories, like podcasts I've ever heard. I remember listening to the whole thing and just being like goosebumps the entire time, just like at the seat of my, just on the edge of my seat the entire time. So everybody should definitely go and check that out. But thanks for joining, Donald.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, those are kind words. I'm honored to be part of all those stories and projects. Yeah, I think that's like, to start off, just that's what surfing is it's such a personal activity, and it can seem maybe even selfish to an onlooker or an outsider that doesn't understand. And it can be very easily, because it is a personal exploration and you ride a wave by yourself. But yet there's a camaraderie of understanding with people that share waves together, or boards, or sessions, or stories like this. And I always try and remind myself of, we're in this together, and yet you can tap into surfing to explore the depths of your own life, really. It's such a great model on canvas to do that. And then you retreat back to the tribe, the household, the community, the neighborhood, and hopefully with a better balance for the silly fascination of riding waves. And I bring that point up now because of even Dave Restovich's comments. He's very loose and light about, like, this really is silly, riding waves. And he's not wrong, except for it does matter, and it matters to us. And so therefore you need to treasure it and cultivate that fascination. So yeah, Dane has been a big, he's such a great friend now, but he's been such a big influence. And I need to choose the right word here. What has he been? Yes, he's encouraging, but he's also demanding in terms of his understanding of how things work and what he rides, and yet also the walking the path together. Just, he's fascinated by what I'm working on, and as I am with him and his family and his life. And it's just been this camaraderie of a long road together. So that was a lot to say. Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. I love surfing. I'm fascinated by design, and I think the conversations of what we ride and how we ride it, more importantly than really what we ride, is very important. It's probably the most understudied part of surfing in surfing's history. And so the work you're doing is, it's new in that it hasn't been done at this level and this scale, and yet it's evergreen, because I think how we surf is going to be more relatable no matter what boards come along, and the waves seem to say much the same. So your work is fresh in that it hasn't been delved into as much as it is today, and for that we're very grateful as a surfing community. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, appreciate those kind words. And I think the way you frame that discussion is what makes surfboards and surfing so interesting, kind of bridging that gap between, the individual and their individual pursuit, and then the connection and that interplay with community. That's kind of like art, you could say that somebody just spending all their time lost in their own world making a painting is a frivolous and thing that doesn't really have an impact on the broader world, but obviously there's this deep personal meaning of it, and then the whoever gets to observe it and whoever gets to experience it, and there's that relationship there. And as a surfboard shaper in particular, I mean, what I find so fascinating about that is, I mean, especially looking at your boards, they are works of art. They're just these gorgeous things, and there's so many different types of art. There's abstract art, there's realism, there's and everything else in between. And your boards are definitely a form of art, but then they're tied to the reality as well, because the board has to perform, and clearly your
Mm,
boards also perform. And I think
mm,
that is what I think is interesting, and I want to dive into a lot of those details. And so
sure.
this is going to be super interesting. So yeah, we have an hour, but we're probably not going to be able to get to everything here. But I wanted to touch on a lot of the kind of probably the more famous boards that you've shaped. And why don't we just start off with probably the biggest one? You know, I mentioned earlier that you won, you and Matt Biolos won the Electric Acid Surfboard Test, where Mick Fanning was riding it. Typically I think when people look at your boards, you're going to think of definitely a much more experimental surfer, in an alternative surfboard rider. And Dave Rosovich fits perfectly into that bucket. But Mick
Mm,
Fanning, he's like a contest machine. He's like, you're just going to ride a 6.0 every single day. And which I think made it so interesting for him to be the rider for the Electric Acid Surfboard Test. Um, but he ended up picking your board, which is so drastically different from his typical boards. And the board that you shaped for him was very drastically different from the one that you shaped for Rosovich.
mm.
But why don't we just talk a little bit about kind of that design process that you went through with Matt Biolos? I mean, he, in a lot of ways, as well, is kind of the polar opposite of you. He's like a contest shaper in a lot of ways. What was that process like? Did you guys disagree over things? How did you resolve them? Why don't you just walk me
Mm.
kind of through that process? Yeah.
It's a good question, and I'm happy to answer it. I'll make sure I challenge me if I don't answer it because I don't want to lose point here. Um, yeah, like Stab paired us together, and I think it was kind of cute. It was really fun to get to work with somebody in that in a collaborative effort like that. Nothing I'd done before, but also nothing I was opposed to by any means. Um, Ended up working really well with Matt, and I respect him as a designer, a husband, a father, a business operator. I really do. And spending that time together was such a radical little petri dish within which I got to play, which I think most people would revel in. It's just a cool opportunity, right? Um, and you say that he's a performance board designer, and you're not wrong. But I also like if you understand how boards work, or at least try and understand it, and you start designing and start understanding the differences. I never think anyone's going to exhaust the master this art of board design, which is so fun. Um, Matt really understands surfboards, and so it was really it wasn't so much a butting heads at all. It was a creative, collaborative discussion on very detailed points in terms of rail, mostly rocker, to be honest, rocker profile. And on that board, the reason that board works is because the proportions of the foil were balanced enough that the board didn't feel tiny under Mick's feet, and he could do what we knew he could do. So, when you're discussing that at length with someone like Matt, he's got a wealth of experience, and it might look different, but you can understand and answer within your own mind why that would complement its other parts. So it it's kind of funny, and this is why I wanted to make sure I honored and answered your question. But at the end of the day, a board works as a cohesive unit, and every board needs to do that. So it doesn't really matter what kind of board you're discussing, shaping, designing. Those things will be challenged, and if you look at them for long enough and ask the right questions, even if you don't understand them, as long as you're starting to look at the whole thing and try and understand how it works together, and which parts challenge each other and at best cohesively work with each other, they're all the same in terms of hydrodynamic flow, the way water works, the way waves are expected to work, but then how somebody um, pilots that craft is the most important thing. And Mick has got the best technique ever. So that was it really was actually quite easy. Like,
Mm.
I know he will have his feet in the right place and his arms will be doing the right thing. And the biggest challenge will be um, his mindset, writing something this different, which half of that was already solved for because that was what the project was, and yet we were given the shortest length category. So each pairing got a different length up to
Mm.
which you could shape within. Um, and that actually made the project quite difficult. I don't think that was the easiest straw that was drawn, but because of it, it was also the most cute and refreshing. So that ended up serving us well, but it's actually quite a simple surfboard. Working with Matt was great. He understands what he's doing to a radical degree, and there's a reason why they're making the best boards in the world. Um, the best part of that relationship's been is because an open door policy, I can walk into Mayhem Surfboards at any given point, and I know a lot of the people that work there now, and I mean I knew them, but now it's you can stop and have a little chat or ask a question or at best look at boards. And I'll finish on this point. Yeah, I got thrust into another stab project building boards for high level surfers. They were the winners from the stab highway that went to Europe. So it was Eli Bucas, Zoe McDougall, Shane Sykes, Letty Mortensen, and Zeke Kelly. Fantastic surfers, like world class approach to their surfing, polished, refined technique. And that was a free license, just build them whatever you want. And so I went back to Mayhem and I was like, hey, I want to get out of my own head. I want to get into a performance realm. Give me some boards. And it was I love writing other people's boards, but I really made a point to do it. And I just wrote Mayhems for a while.
Mm.
Just got into the shortboard mentality, um, to honor them, to be almost understand exactly. I mean, I used to ride those boards and just to kind of get back in their little wheelhouse, knowing what they would be getting off. So the best part of that was, there was no need to be, I mean, I got a couple new boards, but there was no need to go and reinvent wheels. I rode a lot of, couple of Crosby's boards, Colavento. They were a touch big for me. Got a couple of boards from Carissa's old boards, you name it. And that was really, really good to do. And
Mm.
that project ended up working really well. And those boards were interesting. But my point is, boards really, no matter what it is, if the design's understandable and you break its parts apart and look at them and put them all back together and try and understand the relationship with how each part has with another, they if that's cohesively put together, the board will work.
Hey everyone, my name is Van, and I'm an everyday surfer that's just obsessed with improving. And I wanted to take everything that I've learned, everything that I've struggled with, all the mistakes that I've learned along the way, and share it with you to help you become the best surfer that you can be. And I'm super lucky on this podcast, I get to interview the world's top pros, shapers, coaches, and take you along on my journey as I try to learn, uncover all the gold so you can apply to your own surfing. So hopefully you're going to get some value out of this. And the best way you can support me is just simply by sharing this podcast with whoever else you think may benefit from it. I also have been working really hard for a long time on something that I think is going to help a ton of people. I know that it was a game changer for myself as well. But more to come on that over the next coming months. I'm super excited. Thank you for all the support. And for those of you just joining for the first time, welcome to the Basis community. Super stoked to have you. Yeah. Okay. I got a couple questions coming off of this, but right off what you said, how did writing a lot more of, Matt's boards influence you? Like, do you think this is going to influence your future designs and make them more quote unquote normal? Or are you still going down this super experimental path, but then maybe that brings certain elements more into kind of the traditional realm? Or is it more just you're still going down this path, but you've just gotten a different perspective that you can play off of, that you can bounce off of? Like, how do you think about that?
A very good question. I'll answer it in two parts. The first part is those normal looking boards are still radically laced with fine details. In other words, why is the sub driver 3.0? It doesn't look that different to the 2.0 to the naked eye, but there's a constant refinement, like, and it's minuscule adjustments in rocker and rail. So boards are endlessly fascinating in that there's so many little nuanced and intricacies that are variable changing, you know. And some people like one and others, and they're hardly that much different, but it makes a big difference. So those boards, they might seem simple and be put into a vanilla category, which is a terrible word, or even just a performance category, and yet they're endlessly fascinating to me because I love those details. Those boards in good waves, that's all you need. We're in a great place in surfing. You can go out and borrow a normal looking surfboard and have a great time. So in that vein, it's almost like, what are we trying to do? And I get trapped in a corner. Sometimes people feel like I'm reinventing a wheel, maybe. And yet, if you do keep pushing design forward and start understanding which things work best, especially in challenging conditions, when the waves maybe aren't as perfect, and you'd say, well, that's maybe between swells, or even if you go on a trip and you're surfing outside of a crowd at a lesser wave, well, then you're at the helm of your creative adventure again. You can choose your own adventure. So for me, design is very much like, what are we trying to solve for? And when it comes to the world's best waves, I don't think we've solved it, but we're pretty far along. You know, board design is fantastic, fins, the whole thing. Um, did it influence the boards that I'm making? It did in the strangest way, and I got a good relationship with Timmy Patterson, and ironically, I've gotten to write a lot of. He keeps try this, and he wants feedback on the boards, which is silly because they're Italo's boards, and it's like, well, this is Italo, but exactly, like what could I possibly tell? However, when we're discussing design, he's like, look what I've changed here. What do you feel? And there, it's cringe, like paddling out with 17 stickers aside, and yet I do it because for one, it's really interesting. My point is, um, when you write something that you didn't make, I have a zero critical mindset, zero editing hat on, zero judgment, and you just surf. And it's like, well, this is built for Italo. I'm definitely not Italo. And yet you can feel a board. A board will tell you what it's supposed to be, what it wants you to do on it, right? And that is a freedom because I don't have to, I should have done this, I should have done that. You just, all of that goes away and you just write something that somebody else made. Now that's a personal thing that I go through because I'm always writing my own boards, and that's why I try to write other people's boards. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that changes things as much as it frees you up to just let go and have fun. Just go surf. Um, yeah, that's a roundabout answer, but it definitely has influence in both in those ways, and very strongly too.
Right. No, I think what's really interesting from hearing you say all that is, I think someone, let's say they just happen across your Instagram and they look at your boards, they, because they can be so unconventional in this
Mm,
beautiful artistic way, one might come to the conclusion that it's experimentation for experimentation's sake.
mm,
But listening to you talk, you're solving for a very specific problem, right? This is like designed for function, and it's not
mm,
just purely form. It's about function, and that's what's driving your experimentation. And I think that
right.
that is what is that's really cool and interesting. And obviously it is true because the boards that you shape did perform and do perform extremely well under these incredible surfers feats. And I think that that is what's interesting. And something you said there earlier, which I think is interesting, is you talk about how in good perfect waves, mix I think it was like the Maldives or whatever, you're surfing like
Mm,
this perfect reef. You're like, well, in those kinds of conditions, in perfect waves, that's where it's pretty hard to go past a high end thruster, a lost sub driver, driver, whatever it might be. But you talked about how it's in those subpar conditions where you think that there's more room for growth and expansion. And do you think that is where kind of these more unconventional approaches are going to shine more, and that's where the experimentation can take us, and surfers just in a new direction, and grow, and help the everyday surfer as well have more
Mm,
fun in those kinds of waves. Is that really where you see it?
I do. Um, Trying to remember my points here because there was a lot of information here. Uh, yes, I think design is going to find most gains and benefit in challenging arenas like small waves or weak conditions. I embrace asymmetry and build stance-specific surfboards. I think the way you stand is your choice. So with that go-to preference, every time you take off on a wave, if you left foot forward or right foot forward, driving a board with your toes versus heels is radically different, and making adjustments and a board specifically suited for which way you stand, no matter which way you ride, has been tremendous. I'm sticking with it, and it's especially helpful in challenging conditions or small waves. So that's just I'm committed to that, and I think we're going to continue to see the results from that. I think that when you approach design, good waves, sure, like we know what works, we know what we love, we'll keep chipping away. I think there's also radical improvements to be made in big wave design with radical ideas being brought to the table. We don't all surf big waves. So that's why I think that the small wave realm is most important. This is now where we need to make sure that we're not answering it with easy to ride alternative ideas. Um, and the project with Mick is actually most interesting because some of those waves were lumpy and some of those waves were really good, and the footage is beautiful. However, a board that you love and cherish and is both relevant now and further on in years to come on under anyone's feet is tapping into what I call maybe a good design, right? Fundamentally, hydrodynamically, the way it's built, the way it works, the way it lasts, anyone can enjoy it. That's a good design. I just got a message from Mick a couple of days ago, really kind, and he was like, "Man, I've been riding the board the last few days. I love it." That to me was really it's really that's amazing. Like it's something that you didn't just ride because you had to, and something that he really is cherishing and enjoying. So I'm speaking a lot, but I want to bring up a point that maybe ties it all in really well. And these are Timmy Patterson's words. And he didn't say them to me. He said them to a friend who was ordering some boards. And he said, you can't look at these, let's just call them weak wave boards, or I don't like to call it a bad wave, maybe a weak wave or a challenging setup or lineup or condition. Don't look at those boards as low performance boards.
Hmm.
And that's where we need to have a discussion, because you as a high performance surfer, you want a high performance board. Perhaps the design is looking a bit odd, but you still can do high performance surfing. And by high performance meaning doing the right thing, being in the right part of the wave. That's the North Star. And that is based entirely around how we surf. So surf technique. Um, and I thought that was so well said, because it's like if you looked at a board and you're like, yeah, this is a real low performance surfboard, then I want it. And if this category of board design is constantly fueled, embraced, and endorsed by people that aren't surfing well, then we're just helping them surf badly, and nobody's challenging them to do high performance surfing. And I don't mean competitive surfing. I just mean I see people phone in a section, and you're like, you could surf better than that. You just haven't tried, or you're not consistently trying to surf better. And it gets back to the point. It's like, well, why?
Hmm.
Well, it feels amazing. And if we go to the beach to leave with these feelings of amazement within ourselves, call it stoke, it's so that you can return back to where you came from, your home, your community, your family, your neighborhood, with a balanced attitude, mindset. I had a really good surf last night, and it was almost embarrassing how joyful I was. Not that I wasn't before, but it was surprising. I couldn't believe it. It was my birthday, and I was like, I'm going for my surf, and I surf a lot. And then there happened to be a really fun, and nobody thought there'd be waves, and there were. I had such a good session riding a new board, and I came home with an easy energy of grace, and that's worth something to me. So that's enough.
That's what surfing's about. I mean, just having that smile on your face and after a good session, especially if it's your birthday.
Yeah, that was lucky. But
That's
I haven't spoken to Timmy Patterson about those comments, but they stuck with me so well because I was like, I haven't, and I want to credit him because those choice of words, high performance boards, and then if these are low performance boards, as opposed to all my boards are high performance boards, these are for knee high waves, will not work and head high wave, not the point. So as ah, that's so funny. I almost called myself as a board designer. That's titles other people give you. As someone fascinated by designs in surfboards and constantly striving to build something for somebody that they love and that works, that's a radical responsibility. And I take it seriously because I don't want to waste people's time or money, and definitely a wave. You don't want to waste the session. And so it's got to work. It's got to work well. And that's the goal.
yeah. So what, let's say what would you, because we're looking at this, we're talking about Mick Fanning's board and we're talking about these boards that you did for in the Stab Highway. Those are going to be relatively high end boards for high performance waves. But what would you recommend to an everyday surfer in everyday waves? Like let's say it's just chest high and it's not the optimal conditions. Like what kind of
Mm.
asymmetry I know is one of your key hallmarks and something that you're really deeply interested in, but describe to us what that board would be. Maybe just describe the board that you rode that gave you so much joy the other day.
Sure, that board's hard to describe. I mean, it's got some radical compression points and relief sites. It's about the 10th one I've made over the last probably 8 years. I go back and forth to the outline. Um, yeah, I mean, that board, that's just such a curveball. I could send you an image of it. Um, but I don't know if I could tell you what to ride, but I could maybe highlight what you shouldn't ride.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to not answer your question. I just think that when you choose a surfboard, it's usually based around comfort, which is great. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, and you don't want to frustrate yourself, but it needs to work. But if you choose something that is going to require more technique to steer, maneuver, surf than you have, well, that's an ill fit, right? However, if you choose something that you can't make work without the ability that you have by your body shape, positioning, and weight distributions, those kinds of things, then you're never going to learn to surf. So I think a lot of people ride boards that are too fat and too wide. And initially, it's cute, like they're stable and they can catch waves, but they can't. They feel like they're surfing on plateau. So, like if I got on a real high performance shortboard, but if that's all I rode for 5 or 6 days, it's just normal. Like, but it demands more of me, right? So what you want to do is look at your mean average of your ability and technique, and jot down the pain points. What are the hardest things for me to get right consistently? Not the anomalies, like not the outlying datum. It's what am I consistently good at, and what am I battling with consistently? And if you look at those pain points, a lot of times people on really wide boards are battling to maybe say stay on rail for long enough or be able to have the board on. I mean, if you video yourself, it's really easy to see, but it's like you're not really on rail. So let's just boil it down, very big brushstroke here. Good surfing's happening when you're on rail, doing committed rail surfing, right? So if a board's too wide or too thick, yeah, it feels fun to bounce around and try and catch some waves, but they're actually laying the board on rail and looking at doing a snapshot of Ethan's turn or Mick's turn. Now, we're not looking at the same condition. We're just like, oh, is your board ever similar to that? And that's why I'm like, you know, I don't really want to tell people what to choose. And when somebody orders a board, that's my job, is what to make them. But usually what they're battling with, or the pain points, the things that they aren't doing, has got a lot to do with what they're trying to do it on. And over the years, and walking through a used rack or even a new board offering, thick and wide is a quick way to solve it, except for I don't think it solves anything. It's really hard to get those boards on rail, especially if you're short or overly endowed, or have really small feet, or are surfing short interval waves. Like you name it. Imagine yourself in that picture and write down your frustrations. Balls in your court. Um, if you were stuck on something that's narrow and foiled out to too large a degree, you're going to frustrate yourself. Pretty obvious. If you ride something that's narrower than you would ever have thought, and yet even just have these glimpsing sensations of what it felt like to be on rail, um, I think you'll quickly start to realize that that's the feeling you're after, and practice being able to do it because it's doable, and your surfing will improve, and then you're having more fun. Yeah.
Huh, interesting. Spoken like a true designer, right? Starting with the problems first and the pain points, and solving from that. I think what's interesting about what you're saying is, I mean, I agree, right? Like you want your surfboard to, there's this balance. There's this risk reward when you are getting a new board, right? You want a board that's going to challenge you and to improve your surfing, assuming that that is your goal, is to progress, right? But you don't want to challenge it too much such that
Mm-hmm.
you're not able to catch waves, right? So you're trying to find that nice balance of like risk reward where you're going to challenge yourself, but the right amount of challenge. And what's interesting about what you're saying is, you're talking about most people order boards that are too thick and wide. So you're suggesting you go narrower and thinner. But what's interesting is your boards are, I mean, I think you're known for crafting shorter boards in some ways as well. So, so then it's like, you're just, and maybe that's what it is. Cause I do remember, was it Dave Rosovich's board? I think he mentioned that it's lower volume, or you may have mentioned that it was a little bit lower volume. So it seems that you're challenging people to go a little bit lower volume. So you're kind of adjusting the dimensions in all the dimensions in a way, right? Shorter, narrower, and thinner. Usually if somebody makes it a little bit narrower and thinner, they're going to compensate with additional length, but you're kind of going all in on just lower volume overall. Am I hearing you right? Am I interpreting this correctly, or?
Yeah,
Um,
you're 100% right. And so yeah, you're right. That's what I did. That's what I do. Let's backtrack the conversation to what happened in surfing. And it'll happen over and over, but maybe it's a good place of where we are right now within this conversation and the timeline, right? So if a lot of boards got adjusted for ease of um, sensation, being able to catch a wave, thicker, wider was a quick fix. But in the long run, I don't think it serves you well on learning how to surf. You'll catch waves, but you're not actually surfing, right? And one day you'll realize that your equipment holding you back, and you'll get on something that lets you learn to do what you do, and then you'll practice that and you'll become more proficient. And that is in a sensitive, rideable, manipulative, or maneuverable, sensitive craft. So yes, just make sure that what you're surfing isn't low performance. That's maybe the best way to say it. And yes, Dave's board was that board's pretty radically low volume. I just knew everyone was going to make him a round, twin fin. I knew the kinds of boards that would be pretty obvious to um, please a man like that with his abilities. And selfishly, I wanted to see him on a thin, very straight bladed, narrow surfboard. Because I think that with his ability, the lines on offer would have been, I mean, and I didn't see Dave Restovich on a thruster in a long time. I personally want to see that. There was a point of difference, but also um, giving him something that he could unlock with his incredible mindset, agility, and ability. That was what I was after. So think of your own surfing, me telling you to ride something more sensitive and bladed and narrow and chipped out. Um, yes, it will be harder initially. However, if you really think about things for long enough, what we're doing is already hard to begin with. Think about how much your surfing's come in your last years, or however many years or months or whatever. However long since you started, what was the hard then is now most commonplace. Don't keep selling yourself short. Like, ride well-made, sensitive, high-performance boards. That doesn't mean they have to be a pointy nose white thruster. Um, and when the waves are maybe challenging, that could look pretty radical maybe, but you know, you want to be on a smaller board. No, you want to be on the most accurate board for your ability to be able to be applied on a wave canvas as possible, so that you're riding the wave, not the board. And that's a real big point. Like, that's actually hilarious that we're here to surf waves, not boards. There's times when you can ride a board for a certain fascination, but that's what surfing is. And those are big brushstrokes and large swaths of information in headlines, and we've got to be careful not to do that. But that's the way I try and think about it, the way I approach a lot of these boards, and the way I've challenged myself in my surfing. Like, I'm on the line too. I'm pushing myself to work on my surfing. Otherwise, what's the point, you know?
Yeah, you know what? Listening to you talk there, I think it's really interesting because, number one, when most people think about alternative boards, they're usually thinking about something that's easy to ride, that's cruisy, which is actually kind of like the opposite of what you're saying. You want something that's going to challenge people, right?
100%.
Um, and what's so interesting is I can just see this in your mindset, right? You're not only asking people to challenge themselves in terms of what they're writing, but you're constantly challenging yourself in terms of like design. And that's why probably your surfboards have, gone in such a interesting direction, because you're trying to push it on all the levels,
Mm,
and you're trying to push it in a way though that's that translates to actual better surfing, which I really appreciate, you know.
thank
and
you.
and and that's what I think is interesting about this interplay. And thinking about Rostovich's board, Dave's board, like the board you did with Matt Biolos on its surface looks more straightforward, right? I mean, obviously you had Matt as a partner, but the front of it looks like one of his round nosed fish is similar to that, and then you get your piece of it, which was the back end, right? Which was you had the asymmetry, but relatively conservative asymmetry compared to some of the other boards that I've seen you do.
Mm,
Whereas the board that you did for Dave was, it seemed like it had all the bells and whistles on it, right? Like, yeah, I was looking at that list, had like a twisted rocker, you had different apexes and wide points and different rails for your heel versus your toe side edge. It seemed like you had everything going on it.
right.
And so I guess that seems like a more pure version of like your expression. And we can't give away too much because we don't obviously want to blow it for you. We're only 2 episodes in, but so we can't really talk about what happened and what's happened so far. But it is definitely very much on kind of that extreme experimental side. But I will say that the board works. Like, everybody needs to check out the Electric Acid Surfboard Test and check it out. And the board definitely works. But like, how do you go through that process of creating something like that? Like,
Mm.
there's just so much going on. I mean, are you the mad scientist who just like throws all the chemicals into a pot and then sees what kind of magical combination comes from throwing everything into that pot? Or are you more isolating specific variables, and iterating one design feature at a time? Has that been kind of your entire, like, you've obviously been shaping for many, many, many years. Like I said, has it been this really one design feature all the time, and you've gotten to this point where you can throw everything into a pot and you know how these things are all going to fit together? Or is it, there's a little bit of magic that happens when you just try everything and then you just see what happens?
It's a good question. Um, Challenge me if I don't answer it well enough, please. We'll go back and try. Um, when I worked with Matt on Mixboard, there was a conservancy to some of those elements, and we were working together, and it was actually really good because yeah, I would have gone nuts, and he reined me back in. That was the beauty of that dance we did together, and we designed that board with 15 minutes, and I'm not
Really?
used to designing on a computer. Well, I mean, yeah,
Well,
it looks like that, and he's like, well, let's just cut one. So we did that. So that's not my world, and I really deferred to him on. I mean, I made him move the mouse, but you know, looking at something at a small scale, and then actually, I was like, I work in full scale. So he's like, well, let's just cut one, and we cut it out. We made one change, cut it, and that was the board. My point is, you know, what you want to do is understand each element and its effects on the whole craft. You don't ride a rail, you ride a surfboard. You don't even ride a shape, you ride a board. So the whole thing works together. If you imagine it was a baking exercise, having a bigger pantry and selecting out of a bigger option of ingredients doesn't necessarily make what you're baking or cooking better. However, if you do choose those and you put them together in an assembly that tastes just right, you could create something that's wonderful. That's my goal. Over the years, I've tried to understand each variable or each element and its effect on its counterparts. At the end of the day, you want a board that's not too fast, but that you can control. You want a board that's fast enough that you can then maneuver. Those are just the kinds of obvious things. So those are the push and pull points. The symmetry is obvious by way of the stance, and then one's ability. Like when I'm building a board for somebody, you really have to reference what they like, what they're able to do, what they're battling with, and what they want to do. If you know what you want to do in your surfing, half of what you're looking at isn't even of relevance. So once again, that's your homework. What can you do? What are you trying to do? What do you want to do? And then half the boards you're looking at, they might be the right color or the right logo. They're irrelevant. Um, Challenge yourself to do that. Coming back to your question though, I do over the years I call them just like Hail Marys, or you just swing for the fence and just go in and make something that you've. To be honest, when I do that, I draw a board first. I can see it completely finished in my mind before I start. And yeah, they come from the strangest things. Sometimes I'll draw it and wait for a while and keep redrawing it. Sometimes it's just draw it, make it. That's the beauty of this craft, that you're able to just build something. I enjoy doing that, so I do it. But um, what's been most helpful, and anybody that is designing boards or reaching out and asking me questions, I'm happy to help anyone if I'm able. Don't feel like you're in this alone. Sharing ideas is the best thing to do to elevate and raise the tide for all boats to float higher, right, in the surfcraft world, or in any world, I guess. But I'll take a piece of foam and make a small model, right about 6, 7 inches. And and I'll do it really well. It'll take 10, 15 minutes. Sit in a dark room with just, say, a garage door open, so you have one light source. And half of the questions of how one concept or characteristics will flow into another get answered when you make it, even at a small scale. Some of them being in a drawing. So with a drawing and then a small model, you get really pretty accurately mapped in your mind where what's going to be, where it's going to change. The actual dimension of where the fin is might be 10 and 5/8 versus 10 and 3/4. You make that in real time, real scale. But it's been really helpful over the years, and it costs nothing.
mm,
So you don't want to go in there and just blow a bunch of materials and waste blanks. It's a waste. But you do want to experiment. You want to be free as a designer, as a thinker, as a surfer. it's the beautiful thing about surfing. You can build and make and repair your own boards. I love that about surfing. I'm really grateful to find myself in this lifestyle compared to say something that would be, you know, I mean, unattainable. Like I'm sure you could make your own golf clubs, but to a point, right? You
Right.
can
I don't.
really make you can make a world class performing piece of equipment for a surfing friend or yourself. That's fantastic. So yeah, make a drawing, make a small model, and that's been where some of the more brave designs have come. And then answer most of the questions best you can in your head, and then pick up the tools and do it. Do it well. Um, I like to ride what I'm offering to other people because yeah, it is a risk, and it's also that it looks ridiculous. No, it starts looking normal to me, but there is a perception of what, and I get that. I respect that. At the end of the day, I like to ride what I'm offering. In other words, the same blanks, the same glass schedule, the same artwork, just the same fabric inlays, every single thing, so that you really start to get a confidence in how to build what you're offering, but then also how it's going to work, how it's going to last, how it holds up. And it takes time, it takes years, and then they change the formula in a blank recipe, and it's frustrating, right? Even
Right.
the rest of its projects is like, now you got to use flax, and I'm all for trying new things. It's like, okay, well, where's the manual? Like, where's the fail points? Watch the episode. Surprises to come. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Hold your head. But that's how we do it.
Yeah.
That's how I approach it.
Now that's really interesting because you made that analogy of baking, and I'm not a baker, but I do know that baking is one might think you just throw a bunch of stuff into a pan and
Mm-mm.
you mix it up. No, it's a science. It is definitely a science. And what strikes me again is you're taking this very scientific, iterative approach to designing what looks like very artistically radical boards, right? And you talked about that board that you were riding that gave you so much joy on your birthday, and you're like, oh yeah, that's my 10th version of that board. So it is this scientific process for you, even though looking at the outside you're just like, whoa, what is it, what are all these things are doing? But it sounds like you've spent a lot of time dialing in all of those elements.
Well, to
um
your point, I won't go on long, but like the thing I'd gotten wrong in every version of that board prior, they were all too thick. They were all too
hmm.
they were all too low performance.
Huh.
And I radically like foiled this board out and made it a lot smaller. And it was I mean, you could surf at a higher level because you could, right? As opposed to like trying to fit a big board in on a tight turn on a tight small canvas. It's like, well, yeah, you could kind of fit it in, but not as spicy and as accurately. Accurate. So I like the word using that word accurate when you're surfing. Like it's not about doing tricks. It's about what's on offer. Where can you be? Where you're supposed to be? What are you doing? How do you get there? Can you get there? Right.
Right. So then is that Ubuntu that you shaped for for Dane, the 411, 4.6 or whatever,
Or
I
two
don't,
and a half.
4.2.5, is that the ultimate realization of the of what you're talking about there? You're just going super small and as short as you can go and low volume as you can go. It looked like an edge board almost as well, kind of like. Is
Yeah.
that like an extreme version of like a lot of your theories coming together there, or what was the intention or the genesis of that?
Yeah. That board. That's a really interesting story, actually. There were concepts, all the design elements in that board I'd played with before, and the and and some stuff you just sort of there's a intrigue and a fascination, and maybe a board sits there and you come back to it, or that kind of thing. And I'd had some really interesting results with this scooped out like lift cavity area. It's like a concentrated concave, and I had some really good results, and yet the boards were very dependent on your back foot positioning. And these weren't big boards; they were say 5.8, 5.9. And if you got your foot in the right place, the board felt really good. But I made one or two for people, and you could tell that their feet were just in the wrong place, and they just, it's like, well, you're gonna put your foot on the tail pad if you're gonna do a turn, right? So I abandoned that idea. But then Dan came to me, and he was in New Zealand, and he was surfing a very small nothing wave, just getting wet. And there was a guy out on a very tiny surfboard, and they got chatting, and he rode a couple waves. And I've since met him. His name is Bobby. He lives in Haleiwa, and he called me and he said, "Hey, Donnie, I want you to make the tiniest surfboard you think could possibly work." I rode this small board, and it really intrigued me. And I could show you in my shop where I was standing. I was on the phone, and I was like, "Okay, I got it." I saw it in my mind, but what I saw was the frustrations of having to have your feet in the right place on the other board with the sensation and the lift I was getting was solved if the board was so short that you could only be in one place.
Right.
So that was the genesis of the Ubuntu. The Ubuntu is an African word. It's translated through a few different languages, but it means shared humanity is the best translation. It's like we're in this together. And he was on his way to West Africa, and that footage of him on the gray and black one, that was a symmetrical. The first one was a symmetrical board. That was him on that Point Break, and then he went back actually to West Africa again, and then all the orange board that he rides, the asymmetrical one, was the very next one. But that's how that board was birthed. It was like, which hydrodynamic elements can I put in together that worked, but also why? And it was because of the effects that they had were good, but there was a variable that was almost too freeing in that you could stand anywhere and it would respond in a different way. That's true for any board, but at that short length. And what happened was, because it's almost like a pixel, you could fit it into any part of the picture. A board that small will fit into parts of the way that other boards wouldn't, with the angle of approach and angle of departure. Much more adventurous. Dane took it to a whole nother level, as he does, right? If a board doesn't let you do the right thing in the right place, it's probably getting in your way. That's not good design in my book. But also, I try and build boards that keep you shortboard ready. Can you step off of a board and be onto a the goal is to be able to travel the world without any boards and borrow something and have the best time because you're in control of your surfing. And once again, it comes down to how you surf. So yeah, there's a reason why I maybe make more challenging boards. And you don't want to give somebody something that's frustrating, but it's also, is this relevant and relative to any part of their surfing? Can they get off this onto whatever other board it is? And you want to complement a quiver. I really think that's important. You should have a variety of people's ideas of what surfing is. Just like I'm writing other boards, I love that. It's a balanced conversation, and certain brands or ideas might resonate with you more, and you'll build out more of those offerings within your quiver. But they need to work together, meaning when on a really good day, you need to be shortboard ready or whatever your preference of design is for good waves, and then you're surfing, right? So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I do have a question though. What is it like catching waves on that board? That size. How hard is it
Yeah,
to catch waves?
yeah. Well, so to back up, my point is the right part of the wave doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So you cannot roll into a wave on that board.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of you don't have waterline length. However, you can take off on a very steep wave way later than you would be able to on something else because, well, the board fits in. So you can't have an early entry, and yet you can be so tight in the pocket because the board fits there. So although it's very difficult, there's parts that have never been available before,
Yeah.
and so it keeps you honest and it keeps you in the power source of a wave, which is just fantastic. Those air swings are a really good complement. I got to ride that board in Kelly's pool. It was such a gift, eh? Finally, like a perfect wave. And I rode 4 different sets of fins in one day. And yeah, that board's not hard to surf, but you got to stay low and draw the right line, which is very available. And then it's rewarding. It's, yeah, as small as that looks. And to be honest, I've made one or two that are bigger for people on demand, but the reality is it's like the concept was one size fits wave. Like if you're 300 pounds, well, you probably can't ride that. I can't change that, but I also can't change the wave. So we designed the board specifically for what would be surfable on a wave. And if you can't ride that, well, I'm sorry.
Right.
It's just like we'd all rather be 80 pounds and in primary school ripping like a little shredder. But you grow up and yet the waves don't change. And that's why you want to be small and light because everything seems more powerful and you can be on smaller equipment in the right part of the wave. Um, at least I think that's what everyone wants to do. But if you imagine that, yeah, one size fits wave was the concept, and yeah, I think you could stretch it maybe a couple inches, but that seemed to be the dimension that was as small as you could go without it being obnoxiously distracting to catch, paddle, ride, duck dive. But yeah, I did get used to it really quickly.
Huh, interesting. Well, I have to ask you this question as a shaper. Uh, I think I'm going to know what your answer is. I mean, what is your opinion on volume?
Um,
Do you even include it as a dim on your boards, or is it, do you use it to help gauge things? I'm guessing not. Like, how do
yeah,
you think about volume?
I don't put any dimensions on a surfboard, mainly because it like if you saw what the board's dimensions were, you'd get half the dimensions you read are wrong anyway. So
Hmm.
if I wrote the board was 19 inches wide, you might feel real comfortable about yourself. You might feel really good about yourself. The reality is that board's 18 and an eighth. If I wrote that, you would freak out. So and yet you can get a tape measure, just measure it. It's like why do we have to tell you everything? Write your pros and cons list, write your frustrations down, be honest with yourself. Get a measuring tape. This isn't you don't have to do everything for everyone. Um, I'm not trying to prove a point, but like the psychological and emotional connection between what number. Oh, I'm riding 31 liters. Like, geez, buddy, put on some weight. Whoa, whoa. You see what I mean? And that might have been like, oh, I used to ride 32.
Yeah.
It's like, well, are you doing good surfing? Is a better question. So I say volume is considered, not calculated. I can't remember who said that once. I took those words. I wish I could honor them, but it's cute and I've repeated it many times. So thank you to them. Don't know who it was. Um, but I like that we have volume only because it's one more thing to know what you like, right? But let's be honest, like a volume between, say, a fish and a shortboard, the same volume, the wave entry, your paddle position, the overall dimension are going to be radically different. Patrick Gudauskas was the first one who I ever heard say, all these boards are the same volume. So from a groveler to a step up, I forget exactly what they were. They were probably like 28.7 liters. Don't quote me, but it sounds about right, and I'm guessing. So he would have a thinner, wider, flatter rocker groveler at 28.7. And then as you went longer, you got narrower and thinner on a step up. So say from 5.7 to 6.4, all these boards were pretty much the same volume.
Hmm.
Even just thinking about that as an exercise is really interesting. So like volume is great, but where you put it, the manipulation of the foil and the plan shape and definitely the rocker, all those boards are gonna, you don't want to ride too much volume. So that was the comfortable volume that he could perform on. And yet why would you go to a step up? It's like, oh, I need some length. I'm at Bell's. It starts to make sense as opposed to, oh, I need a bigger board to catch these waves. It was more about what the wave needed for him to do what he was doing. He'd be worth an interview on that. Yeah, I've heard him speak on that a little bit, and he's very well versed in understanding what he likes in his boards, and that's such a detailed imagination and mind on the boards he's ridden and helped design and part of. Like thinking back to the Fever, and I think he's on Bobby Quads right now, and then you'll see him on a CI Fish and those kinds of things. Endlessly fascinating. We talk for hours on boards. I love it. I love it. But at the end of the day, he's doing the right thing in the right part of the wave, right?
Yeah.
So volume, that's another reason why I wanted to ride other people's boards, because those off a machine you can calculate that. So it was interesting to see, like, all right, well, what volume is this board,
Hmm.
And yeah, it tended to be like kind of want pretty low volume boards, and yet being able to enjoy once you're on a bigger board, like, okay, well, how do you surf this board now, right? Um, I don't mind the volume thing as much as some other people get real hung up on it. I just think that most people's boards are too thick and too wide. So try
Yeah.
that hat on for yourself. I don't really care what the number of the volume is, but your board's probably too wide.
Yeah. That's a fascinating discussion. Well, we should probably work towards ending up. Yeah, I feel like okay. We'll probably have to do a follow-up podcast. This is such a fascinating discussion. We need to keep going on some of these topics, but we are coming up on time now. I got 3 more questions for you.
Sure.
First question is, what is your intention when you stand up on a wave?
Mm, the the first thing that comes to mind is it's a bit of a reverse engineering, but those waves when you kick out and you almost can't remember what happened,
Hmm.
and you replay it in your mind. It's like, oh yeah, like getting that lost. Um, Good sessions are when you absolutely get lost in time. I've had it before when you're like, goodness me, I'm cold. I must have been out here for a long time, right? Um, Getting into rhythm is probably the most accurate way to say that, though. Um, and I surf a lot of small waves and design boards specifically for small waves, and have chosen to dedicate radical time to that, for those conversations and discussions we had about why design matters in that realm. I'm personally fascinated by that. Um, but connecting the dots and getting into a rhythm on a small wave and doing high performance, or my best performance at that time, which is always growing, trying to do better all the time and working on my performance and my technique, feels good, and I like that feeling. So that's the best results, and so that's always the intention. Getting things wrong or feeling a board that doesn't quite work is almost easier because you walk away with more information and not just a good time and a good sensation. So that's not lost either. The intention is to be free and learn as much as that's part of my homework. So it's a little double-edged, like getting feedback, learning, but constantly just flowing, like good timing, good precision. That's all I can dream of, and it comes together every now and again.
Yeah. I I can only imagine what it's like being a shaper riding your own board. It's like you're probably just constantly thinking about like the board and like, oh, I need to tweak this and tweak that. And that in some ways could be like an obstacle to getting into that flow state that you're talking about. But at the same
It's a
time,
full
like when
obstacle. Yeah,
yeah,
it fully gets in the way, and I thought that would be the most amazing thing to build your own board, and it is neat, and it's
yeah,
not lost on me. But watching somebody else ride your board and see them get to that level, that the the first time I saw that early on, it was the second board I made. Actually, it was the first board I made, and a friend rode it and he ordered one after 2 waves. That's how the whole thing started. But then watching him ride that board, Brendan Gleeson is his name, still has the board. He's in Cape Town, South Africa, and seeing the joy on his face, that was, and because at that point you could tell, like, wow, this matters to someone else, and I'm totally disconnected from it. Like, there's boards in the water right now that I got to make that I had so much fun making, but now they're bringing someone else joy. That's a pretty cool thing. Really honored to get that. Yeah, that's just an honor.
yeah. You just get to give people like pure joy. I mean, what could be better than that? That sounds so fun.
Well, you partner with them in their wave rides, and that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, second question is, if you had to ride the same wave for the rest of your life, what wave would that be? I mean, if it's a
Ooh.
secret spot, you can just explain it. But you know, How big would it be? What would be that wave?
We
What would
just
it
want to
be
get
like?
barreled, so I mean, oh, that's a good question, huh? For the rest of your life, well, Dane approaches his surfing with only bringing things in that he can die on. In other words, like what can he retire with in terms of technique and his ability. So he doesn't bring in, yeah, I mean, you can speak to him about this, but we've gone back and forth. And he's like, yeah, like that's why I only chose to work on and incorporate things on that I can use that are um, applicable as I get older, right? Um, so I think, yeah, it would probably just be a barreling wave because I think if you get frail, if you can just make the drop and be able to pull in, you'd have the most amazing memory or feeling as
Hmm.
opposed to trying to do big, yeah, one wave for the rest of your life. Yeah, it would be a reef wave, a deep water reef wave with a scattered takeoff so that there's a bit of a lucky packet element, bottom turn into barrel down. I don't know. I've never surfed Bells or Margaret's, but probably something like that comes to mind. Yeah. I would say
Nice.
J-Bay, but it's too it's actually too close to shore, which sounds silly, but when you surf that wave, you don't realize how close to the shore you are. You're like really parallel with the coast. I kind of like to be out to the in the middle of the sea. Does that make sense?
Okay. Deep water J Bay
No,
sounds like.
J-Bay, you run parallel with the coast, so
Okay.
you don't actually feel like you don't want to be sitting out to sea there. Trust me. I guess, but
Oh.
like West Coast, but
Got
um,
it.
yeah,
Okay.
there's waves in South Africa that I would probably, but they're cold. You see, I want to be warm.
Warm one. Okay. Got it. Got it.
I didn't
It's
ask you that
hard.
first.
It's an impossible question. That's kind of why I ask it because I think it's an interesting exercise. Like if I had to post up in one place that this is all I got, like what would that be? And I think it's interesting because in some ways I think it says something about like what you're after as well, right? Like some people want to get barreled. Some people just want to do like a million turns. Some people, there's a lot of things that go into it. All right. So if you were stranded on a tropical island and let's say
Mhm.
it's a double overhead day, like, fun size rippable waves, what would be, what board would you bring to that tropical island?
Hmm. Well, I'm. It's a board that I'm working on right now. It's a concept more than a board. I built 9 of them. I haven't shared or shown any of them. I will be soon, but I want to present them as a series, as a collection. Actually, I built one for Dane. That'll be released here pretty soon. I think the Surface Journal doing that one. Anyway, um, it came from imagining how narrow of a board I could possibly ride. So we'll end on this if you want, or we can keep going. I don't have to go anyway. But imagine if everything in surfing is designed to make it more comfortable or even easier to do, right? That's good design because you're tapping into design to solve a problem. But if you consistently extrapolate that, there's a risk of potentially losing the sensation of what surfing actually is. So personal fascination. It was an upcycled project. I had these big offcuts from some guns I'd built for Hawaii, and um, I made the narrowest board I thought I could possibly ride, purely to see if the sensation was even deeper. Like if you got a ride on this board, just the fact that the feedback from riding it, it was a single fin, radically narrow, um, and I paddled it out, and I could not even I could not stand up on a wave. And after about 6 or 7 attempts, but I had 0 point of reference too. And then, because I didn't know where to stand, and then I locked in, and the waves were terrible. Well, they weren't terrible. The waves were challenging. Choose the words. And then I locked into one and realized, oh, it needs me to do this. And I rode about 6 or 7 waves to the beach that evening. And it was very much the information coming back was, I still thought about that wave the next day. Anyway, so it led to this very, very narrow board experiment. And they've gotten shorter and narrower and thinner. And I've done single fins, twins, quads, thrusters. I've just made the first asymmetrical one. Everything's been symmetrical to honor just like explore every part of this before, because all the rules are out the window. Everything you thought you knew about surfboard design is gone, because once you go to these dimensions, it was different. Um, I would happily be stuck with that surfboard.
Just so we
Yeah,
can get a frame of reference, how narrow is it? How thin is it?
that board, the latest one, and the one I've been riding lately, as recently as the last swell. Um, that board is 6, 7.5 by 15 and 7/8 by 2 and 3/8.
Oh man,
I'm
that
guessing
sounds
that board,
fascinating.
it is, and I'm telling you, like, there's parts of surfing that feel so normal and so refreshing and rewarding. You roll off the bottom and you bend your knees, and the board comes around so quickly that next thing you're up at the top and you roll the board over, but you never unbent your knees. So you're in this compressed state,
Hmm.
which I strive for. Like, Dane's a huge inspiration of staying low to the board like that, with using your legs as a compression and extension, recoil even, but as your power source. And that just happens naturally because the board comes around so quickly. So you have this feeling of flying, really,
Wow.
is a
Well,
word. Yeah, so I would choose that because it's not easy to ride, but the sensation is so much more pronounced. And maybe that would get old and be boring too, but I don't think so. So yeah, that I would stay on that.
wow. That
And that
sounds
board I'd guess that board around 27 liters, just by the way it sits next to a
right.
T-pad or something. So um, yeah, I didn't think I'd be riding that, or even could ride that a few years ago. Or yeah, it's interesting how things change like that, come into your world. So stay tuned on that. I want to present that as a series, just because it's like it's kind of it's really not understood on its own, but as the collection, and you can see the progression of thought, which was
Hmm.
100% a self-fascinating experiment. And it's nothing that you would build for somebody. And I mean, I'd love to, but it's more makes you think about surfing. But I really wish I'd built one for Dave Restovich, but I wasn't deep in the experiment enough yet. That would
Hmm.
have been, as much as that board was fun. I built it. Like, I'd never built that before. I just imagined these elements together for him. But I just could imagine him picking up a board that narrow, going, hmm.
For sure. Oh man,
Well,
I
it's
can't
like
wait to
it's
see
like an
it.
Alaya.
Yeah.
When you pick up an Alaya, you're
Right.
like,
Yeah.
how is this even possible? I rode one on Sunday afternoon. It was like, oh, it's time to pull out an Alaya again, and it was fantastic. Like the
Huh.
the feeling of riding a wave, that when everything's that simple and stripped down, and you feel the board locked in, and you're flying on a tiny wave. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's like you get so caught up in these elements and details and design features that stripping everything. It's just having fun in the sea and having that pure sensation of being part of the water, and that flying sensation is really, that's the goal for me. How about for you? Like, what are you looking for when you're in your surfing?
I'm just trying to go fast and do turns.
Mm.
That's really what I want to do.
Bottom turns or top turns? And I'm pushing you here because this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Like like what people are looking for. Like, if you really break it down, I think you can paddle out to a crowded lineup and just tick the boxes, not to tick the boxes, but like get what you're looking for really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the bottom turn and the top turn are so interconnected, right? The better your bottom turn, generally, the better your top turn is going to be. But I just want to do a good, wrap, carve, and throw lots of spray. I was interviewing Doug Silva yesterday. He's Seth
Mm.
Moniz's coach, and he's just
Yeah, yeah,
talking about like, it's interesting because his approach to surfing is so spiritual. And one of the things he was saying is like, my intention, I think it was when I was asking about his intention, but he's like, I just want to be throwing so much spray that like I don't even have to wear sunscreen because there's just so much water in the air. I'm just like in the shade the whole time. I'm like, dude, or you're in the barrel the whole time, which is what you sound like you want. I mean, those all sound good to me. But yeah, I just want to do turns and just go fast and just have fun. And that freedom feeling that you're talking about, where you lose yourself, and because I think that when I surf, I'm definitely probably very analytical. I'm constantly like scanning and thinking about my technique
mm,
as I'm surfing, and I'm constantly making minute adjustments, and I
mm,
think that there's probably different schools of thoughts in terms of whether that helps or it hurts. I would imagine if like you're a CT surfer, especially at that level where so much of it is your confidence, that would get in the way of your surfing and that pure expression, especially because at that level as an elite surfer, your technique is pretty, you know, especially if we're talking about the absolute, I mean, pretty much all the CT guys, like they probably don't even have to think about their technique. But as someone that's nowhere near their level, I think to improve and to progress, you do have to be more thoughtful about your technique and what's going on, and making those minute adjustments as you go along. Um, but, obviously the best sessions I've had have also been kind of what you're talking about, where you're just in that flow state and things just happen. And, there's kind of this magic. There's this magic to it. And you're almost like, yeah, you just lose yourself in the wave. And a board that helps me do that, that sounds like the best board, you know? Um, but I'm somebody that also is constantly getting nerdy and tinkering with their boards, like all the boards that I have a list of all their dimensions. I'm like measuring their rocker. I'm like
that's cool.
constantly thinking about like, oh man, what if this board was like, because I have I have a 5.5 rocket wide, which I love. And immediately when I was riding, I was like, man, I kind of want an asym version of this, and I'm like,
Mm.
because the tail is kind of wide, and I'm like, oh, well, I wonder what an asym version of this would be like, and this and that, like, and that's why, when we were talking earlier about how if you were designing surfboards, how that experimentation would never end. Um, that's that's where I'm like, oh man, if I try to shape a surfboard, that would just be a never ending rabbit hole that I would never be able to climb out of. And
I
luckily,
mean, it's
that's
yeah, it's true.
and if that's your job, and you've made it your job, that you've made it your life, then that's amazing. But I'm just like, oh man, I wish I had time enough to do this, but unfortunately, I do not have that time. So, I
Right.
would rather take that part of it and let somebody else do it, because I'm like, there's no way there's no way that me shaping a board, I'm going to be able to get to, a Donald Brink level. I'm going to let you be the expert and the craftsman and the perfectionist in that world. And I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm just going to love it, and that's where I would like to be. So,
I think a future of I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, listening to your comments there. I think the future of part of this industry is going to be having people make a small version or really good drawings or probably computer. I don't know. Choose your path, but and bringing that to a shaper. I mean, it's like it's pretty silly that I'm still hand shaping surfboards, but I love build. I'm a board builder. I like building the entire board because of every detail that goes into it. I love that, and I like the variety of tasks. But as much as I don't want to be a gun for hire, there's designs that I'm committed to and passionate about, and people come and want, which is great. But like listening to your stories, like making a small version of something that might be an idea, um, and presenting it to somebody is like, does this make sense? And instead of like, hey, will you build this? I think that helps the conversation and could even push other people as designers, like, well, look what they're thinking about. And I think we're in a place where the collaborative exercise of working together is becoming more normal
mm-hmm.
in surfing, in particular, and that's exciting. I think I call it the ex pros people that used to be professional surfers and they retire, what they ride has a way bigger draw than who's winning today.
Right.
And because we can depend on their established technique, but now they don't have to win. So what feels good? And to Timmy's credit once more, I want to make sure I credit him. They need to be high performance boards. You don't want to, those guys don't want about low performance. They might be obscure and whatever, but it's interesting what they choose, and then they bring in their technique and their ability. But now they're just surfing because they love it, and it becomes part of who they are in their life as opposed to who they are because of what they do. You don't want your identity to be wrapped up in surfing, but you want it to be balanced part of who you are so that you care for it. I think that's really, really as far as this conversation of board design goes, going to be interesting to see who brings, because a lot of people maybe even don't want to be around the tools making something, but they probably have some really good thoughts. You're seeing it with fins, people starting fin companies and they
Mm.
3D printing and all kinds of opportunities with different techniques and manufacturing ideas that never existed. And well, it's an easy, isolated element to change and feel and try. So hats off, you know? Yeah, that was something that didn't exist not so long ago.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. I mean, that would be such an interesting experiment to like collaborate on a board with somebody like that. I mean, but again, I'm definitely somebody that it's interesting. I think we're similar in some ways in that like your approach is very much like I want to I think you're definitely way more radical and experimental in terms of your approach, but you always kind of bring it back to uh, is this going to make your surfing better? I think I probably am more on like I just want like that. I'm definitely somebody who like just iterates and just constantly tweaks, you know, a little bit by little bit, right? Like with my board width, I'm just going like little bit by little bit narrower and narrower and thinner because I
Mm,
want that. I'm like I have a conservative approach to how different a board is going to feel, but I'm at the same time I'm willing to experiment and I want to experiment, right? And so like an asym board sounds, you know, super fascinating, but um, I've ridden one. My buddy Drew, he shaped an asym for me, and it was a. But the issue with that was it was such a radically different experience. You
right.
know that, you know, the tail was wide, but it was an asym and it was a twin. That it was almost too big of a jump. It was maybe too big of a challenge for me in terms of
Sure.
like dialing in my boards and then, you know, just normal kind of thruster type boards and you know, and then going to this wide tailed 5'2", you know, twin. And I think I tried keels and I tried regular, you know, more uprights. And I had one of the best sensations ever on that board as well. I just kind of I remember going up to this turn and just was in the right spot and just like that effortless feeling. But it was so hard to replicate again that I was like,
Mm.
you know what, this is going to throw me off. So I went back to a more normal board, you know?
I call
Um,
them the wild horses. Like you don't want to create,
yeah.
and there's time for it, but like personally, I think building something for somebody that's you got to have to relearn how to surf is pretty radical, and it could be a distortion of what they've spent so long trying to do. Their job is to be trying to do the right thing so that you can ride anything. So
Right.
therefore, it's like, does this work? It's like, well, if you apply the right technique, but also being in the right part, doing the right thing. So a board needs to let you do that with accuracy. Um, yeah, I push the boards way too much in the early stages, and learning like the relationship between things and how far is too much change. I try and change as little as possible. And I wish I didn't have to make asymmetrical boards, to be quite honest. Yeah, they don't look as nice and they're really hard to sell, but they work, and I'm committed to seeing how far we can go with them. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, like seven things to a small degree in change is better than one or two to a radical measure, is what I've found, and I depend on those. So, yeah, twisted rocker, offset, wide points, fin positioning, foil, rail thickness, and apexes, like those two, all those things to as small degree as possible, once again, to promote cohesivity is pretty much the daily.
Wow, that's perfect. Well, why don't we go ahead and end on that? That kind of perfectly summarizes your approach. This was an absolute pleasure, Donnie. And yeah, we'll have to do this again for sure.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks for your work, and yeah, I'm trying to think of one. Like I listen to podcasts on surfing like every now and again, and it's kind of fun. It's like at the end of the day, like why, what, what are you gonna like? I'm not here to teach anybody anything. We're just sharing ideas and references and experiences. But like if I could challenge somebody, like your surfing is yours, so take account of it. Um, if you had people that you surf with often enough that can help you and be somebody to be accountable to in terms of like, am I doing the right thing in the right part of the wave, or at least trying to learn to do that? These kinds of resources are really helpful. But at the end of the day, just have a cup of coffee and just sit with yourself and just, if you ask the honest big boy questions like, what am I doing? What do I like to do? What am I trying to do? It actually becomes quite clear what's next to work on. And that's what this thing is. You work on your surfing for years and years and years, and then you die. And yet that journey it's really precious. So look after it, but it can be so overwhelming. And I just see so many people um, that's got nothing to do with competitive surfing, but just selling themselves short of an experience that could be like they're incredibly athletic and have beautiful long arms and strong knees, and yet they're surfing with straight legs and in the wrong part of the wave. And you would never say anything or judge that. Don't hear me wrong, but sit down with your own surfing. Look at what you got to work with. Chart yourself a course of what's not what's next, but where you'd like to go. What are the kinds of feelings that you are enjoying and would like to keep enjoying? And it comes really clearly. I mean, it's to be honest, it's not buy a new board usually. In fact, maybe never. Um, and yet the goal is then to be able to have this as part of your life. And I always say travel the world without any boards, and you just borrow something on a beach somewhere and have the most amazing time, right? Um, so if I could leave people with that, like just take stock of where you're at, what you want to be, and this is free information, and that will be your own free experience. So I hope that helps. Always trying to think of like what did we do here? Like, did we inspire people? I don't think so. I think what we did maybe is just gave them permissions to dream.
Well, this definitely has me dreaming for sure. All right, man. Well, I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Van. Appreciate you.